I was told by reputable sources that some f***o made a video about me, trying to get in me old noggin, saying I was insecure. There ain't no man more secure than me!
When we look at Phyllis Mother Gooseberry Futterman in her current form, is it hard to think of her as human? She is so monstrous. She presents as a middle-aged, heavy-set woman with severe delusions and dissociative identity disorder, wherein she is constantly talking to herself while imitating the voice and personality of her deceased father. She does this using a puppet which replaces her right hand and conceals an electric drill, and which she uses to remove the faces of her victims so she can wear them in replacement of her own. She's got no hair on her scalp. She is obsessed with dental hygiene and will threaten to drill your mouth to pulp if your teeth aren't clean enough. Her body count is probably in the hundreds, and I do mean that in more ways than one. Can you imagine what had to transpire to produce so grotesque a person? Growing up, Phyllis Futterman worked alongside her father, Dr. Futterman, in his dentistry work. The details are sparse here, but we'll discover more elsewhere later. An unspecified number of years later, Phyllis and her father found themselves so successful that they got the chance to be broadcast on local television. The name of the program, the Mother Gooseberry Hour, implies that Phyllis herself was the main star, despite the fact that it was her father who was the dentist. Same goes for this voice line, where Gooseberry uses her goose puppet to speak for Dr. Futterman.
You could have been a nurse's, somebody's wife's, but no, you had to get on the TV. You had to be a big star.
We can only assume their television show was centered around teaching children the value of dental hygiene, and I'm guessing Phyllis's musical theater background also played a large role. What kind of role Dr. Futterman himself played, it's hard to say. I'm not sure whether he appeared on camera at all, whether he only inspired the content of the show from behind the scenes, but it does say the Futterman's popularity, plural, which suggests that both daughter and father played their own active roles. Between 1951 and 1955 is when the Mother Gooseberry Hour was on air, but during that 4-year period, Dr. Futterman died, and we don't know exactly when or how. I mean, I'm just lying. Is there anyone who disagrees with the theory that Phyllis killed him and hid his body? Dr. Futterman's corpse has still not been located. Whenever you hear something along those lines in storytelling, you know something very suspicious went down. That or the person is still alive out there somewhere, but I really doubt that that's the case for Dr. Futterman. Still, Phyllis murdering her father is just an unconfirmed theory for now, but I feel very, very strongly that this is what's happened, and it's going to feed into my arguments later on. After Dr. Futterman's death, whether or not it was by his daughter's hand, said daughter began to lose it. She became hysterical and dissociative. She started teaching the wrong sorts of lessons to the children watching her show. It got bad enough that in 1955, the police were called in and raided her studio, at which point Phyllis killed 2 of them and injured 5 more using her goose puppet drill. Phyllis was sent to Holmesburg prison, where unethical experiments were conducted on her and her fellow inmates. Phyllis herself got her face more or less melted. This is why she wears the faces of corpses when we see her in the game. But back at Holmesburg, Phyllis was interviewed by Clyde Perry, who worked for Murkoff and was looking for the perfect blend of charisma and violence for his prime asset candidates, and he decided that Phyllis fit the bill. And the rest is history. Gooseberry is now in the Signala facility with full control and dominion over her 3 trials, a fun park, an orphanage, and a toy factory. The problem with this background summary is that it neglects to mention one very crucial fact, and that is that Dr. Futterman was a horrible, horrible father to Phyllis. And I think it's intentionally left unsaid, not just so that us players can feel smart for figuring it out all on our own, but because in canon, it is also the case that the only person who knows how evil Dr. Futterman was is his own daughter, Phyllis. The truth comes out when Phyllis, as Mother Gooseberry, imitates her father through her goose/drill puppet, who I'll refer to as Puppet Futterman to avoid confusion. Puppet Futterman's dialogue is invariably abusive and hateful. He is always insulting his daughter at every turn, every opportunity he gets. He insults her for her weight, her intelligence, her incompetence, her smell.
Please, Daddy, call me Mother Gooseberry in front of the children.
I should have called you, mistake, and then I should have called the orphanage.
Gooseberry's performance is convincing enough that you can easily get lost in it, but if you step back you will remember that Puppet Futterman is not a separate person from Mother Gooseberry. Puppet Futterman's words are spoken by Gooseberry, who is Phyllis. Phyllis is constantly insulting herself. Dr. Futterman died, she escaped his abusive harangues, and then she, by her own volition, made a goose puppet to bring him back to life, just so she could relive his abuse all over again? Why would she do this? The easy answer is she has a personality disorder. She has multiple personalities, and her father's one of them. But we can't leave it there. We still have to ask why this is the case, why her personality disorder manifests in exactly these ways. To answer this question, we have to back up a bit. And I also want to preface by saying that, compared to the video on coyle, I'm going to be basing a lot of my claims here off of much more conjecture and speculation, and if I'm wrong in these, then all my claims kind of fall apart, but I do not think I am wrong. What kind of man was Dr. Futterman to everyone other than his daughter? Well, he probably had to show some minimum of decency and humanity toward his clients and potential colleagues in order to be a successful dentist. Not just that, but he was also apparently successful enough to eventually co-host his own television show. If he could get that far, even if his daughter was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, is it too much of a stretch to imagine that Dr. Futterman had to be charismatic, inviting, endearing, accommodating, and every other positive ing word you can think of? I also like to think of this line from Clyde Perry when he was taking notes on his first impressions of Mother Gooseberry. He says, "The Dr. Futterman personality is abusive and violent, but he's funny and I like him." That second part is everything. It shows that even at his worst, which no one but Phyllis likely ever saw, Dr. Futterman still carries enough charm to be likable instead of outright off-putting. And isn't this the exact same way we players see him too? We hear him calling Phyllis a dumb cow, a schmaltzheifer, which just means a fat cow. He tells her to get the grease out of her eyes, and after all of this, we laugh. We throw a bottle at Mother Gooseberry and Dr. Futterman says,
Hey, that's my job!
Yes, there's the underlying pity of, oh, that's so mean, but on the whole, we are entertained. I think Dr. Futterman in life was unanimously viewed as a stand-up guy, a role model in the community to be loved and idealized and admired. And even if I am overstating it, I don't think you can deny the fact that Dr. Futterman would have had to hide his evil side from the rest of the world. Only Phyllis would ever get to know how abusive he could really get. And you have to think about what that did to young Phyllis. The fact that she alone was the target of all her father's abuse and mistreatment must have shown to her that something was wrong with her. Because it couldn't be her father, no. Such a wonderful man, seen as wonderful in all other circumstances and by everybody else, the fact that he would find such egregious fault with his daughter could only mean the daughter was woefully inadequate. Phyllis's shame and guilt would have been immense. She would have internalized it fully and without question. Does this sound a little bit like our read on coyle? All the blame was placed squarely on the helpless individual in youth, and this had devastating psychological effects. But the manifestations of Gooseberry's and Coyle's psychoses are not the same, not at all. I think gender is our moderating factor here. Whereas Coyle learned to mask his fear and vulnerability, girls, or women generally, are socialized not to express anger or desire. Ever. This was a lot more true in that era of the 1960s than it is today. Phyllis would have felt that she had to take her father's abuse without complaint or resistance. It's the way things are. You tolerate, and you keep on tolerating, and if you feel the slightest bit of heat rising to your cheeks, you better stamp that out and calm right down. It's not your place to experience anger, it's not within your right to express it. The thing is, you can spend your whole life training to hold in your anger, but just because you don't express it doesn't mean you don't feel it. Very clearly not. The Mother Gooseberry we know nowadays is exploding with rage with every other voice line, so much so that Clyde Perry describes these episodes as lapses into a lizard-brained murderous rage monster. I think all of Phyllis's suppressed anger coming to a head is what finally led her to kill her father. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The only other hint of Futterman's death we have comes from these voice lines, which might imply that Dr. Futterman was suffering health issues due to his very historically accurate diet. Whether he died from these complications, we don't know. It could be that Phyllis saw her father was in pain and on his way out, and so decided to put him out of his misery. There's a range of possibilities here. In any case, after Phyllis realized her father was dead, I imagine she had immediate regrets, because we see that even today as Mother Gooseberry, it's very clear she still wants to win her father's love and approval. She propagates his values of good dental hygiene to the point she's willing to murder us over it. She follows his every command, which is technically her own, even as he, or technically herself, is insulting her as he's giving them. But Phyllis can't win her father over, not now that he's dead, and she can't bear to face the reality that her father died thinking his daughter was a failure. This must be a large part of the reason why she had to bring him back to life, even if only as a puppet. And why else do you think she snaps as severely as she does when Dr. Easterman points this out?
You think I am some kind of puppet? You pull my string?
You're literally a puppet.
Those
Don't you upset Daddy?
Mother Gooseberry refuses to have her delusions shattered elsewhere as well.
Why can't they just behave? They're not even alive. I didn't mean that. I didn't say that, Mother. I'm being good.
We see how angry Gooseberry gets when we try to harm the mannequin children in her trials. She appears to genuinely believe they are real. This is probably due in part to the heavy dosage of interesting chemicals Murkoff is feeding her, but this is also who Gooseberry has become. It's the wonderful, pain-free world of the television, of pretend and of make-believe, which she gravitated towards so heavily for support all her life, and which she can no longer differentiate from reality. It was probably only when Dr. Futterman was working with his patients and smiling for the cameras that Phyllis got to see her father did have a pleasant side. That would be the only time when he wasn't abusing her, when she didn't feel like an absolute garbage human being. It only makes sense that she would very literally live for those rare moments, that she would view them as precious, that she wouldn't ever want to experience anything but. This is why she loves to be on television. It's why she loves to put on that performance, because it guarantees her a brief moment where everything is happy and sweet. I think this makes very apt the symbolism of Phyllis wearing a false face 24/7, because that's what she's done with her personality, and it is exactly what her father has taught her, that you can show the world one face, and then behind closed doors, transform into a different person entirely. So Phyllis has chosen she wants to be Mother Gooseberry all the time. That's the face she wants to put on. Because Mother Gooseberry has a purpose. She's loved by all the children watching her on TV. You know who isn't loved? The loser, friendless girl hated for all her faults by her brilliant father. And that's something else, by the way. There is a voice line suggesting that Gooseberry was not very popular among her peers growing up.
When I was little, the other children never looked for me. I won't be so cruel. I'll find every last one of you.
I suppose this is not surprising. Theater kids are weird today. They've probably been weird since the dawn of time. And when have you ever heard of a kid who was into taxidermy? Phyllis probably alienated all the other kids her age, not by any fault of her own, but just because the social realities have always been cruel in these ways. This voice line also reveals one of Phyllis's biggest motivations, to give the children the love and affection she never had growing up. Even if she won't admit outright that her father mistreated her, she still recognizes that what she went through is something no child should ever have to endure. That's why in Cleanse the Orphans, she does everything in her power to spoil the children rotten. Movies, parties, flour. She has a whole environment built around a fun park. Everything she does is meant to make the children as happy as possible, to always ensure they're having as much fun as they can, and to be the mother that she herself never had growing up.
Just warms the cockles of my heart to see the children so happy and engaged. Anything to see my children smile.
She goes so far with it as to warp the meaning of fun entirely. The idle grunts under Gooseberry's control are terrified of her notion of fun.
Fun, fun, fun. Nobody gets to be happy, but everybody gets to have fun.
I'm having fun. I'm having so much fun.
I imagine she enforces some kind of unspoken regime where everyone has to smile and pretend they're enjoying themselves, so as to keep up the pretense Gooseberry wants to maintain. And if you're bleeding from 15 open sores and you're looking and acting all miserable and in pain, then you're ruining Mother Gooseberry's fun, and so she will probably introduce you to Dr. Futterman. I think Gooseberry has conflated the idea of fun with absolute unrestricted freedom. That having fun means you get to do whatever you want. No exceptions, no rules, no extenuating circumstances ever. And I think this way of thinking is the driving force behind her practice of encouraging children to engage in delinquency and debauchery, which I've not until now discussed. I kind of glossed over it really. But we cannot ignore the significance of Mother Gooseberry leading children to commit, and I quote, violence, theft, and possibly murder. Now you might be thinking, sure, I can accept that there's this conflation of fun with absolute freedom going on, but even if I had absolute freedom, that doesn't mean I would want to exercise that freedom by going so far as to commit all these horrible acts. So where is all this violence, theft, and murder coming from? From all of Phyllis's suppressed anger and desire. She spent her whole childhood playing the good girl for her father and never quite being enough, and now she probably has enough anger stored up from taking all this abuse in silence to last her another 63 or so lifetimes. And I think she wants to share that anger with the children. She wants to live vicariously through them, and so she teaches them to misbehave and rebel in all the ways she never got to.
Children, all adults are wicked, vile, disgusting killjoys. Murder them! Murder them all!
Mother Gooseberry's world follows the simple philosophy of, if it feels good, do it. Sex, flour, food, murder. Give in to all your basest desires. You have to be pure appetite. Believe in nothing at all. And at one point or another, I feel like Gooseberry, surrounded by all this self-indulgence of her own making, let herself slip as well. We can safely assume that Murkoff's drugs might also play a role in reducing her inhibitions, but I would also like to attribute this to her lifelong suppression of all desire. Because to be human is to desire, and to indulge, and to express what you feel. And if you suppress all this for long enough, if you believe when you're told you have to hold it in, of course it's going to come out in very unhealthy ways, and of course you're going to go so overboard once you do that it's just awful to look at. Gooseberry gives in to all self-indulgence nowadays. She loves flowers so much she made a song about it. I'd argue that from a young age, she learned that the sniffing of flower would keep the depressive episodes at bay, and now that she has free reign, she's torn away all the restraints. She had carnal relations with the guards in prison, she keeps reagents in cages for very likely the same purpose. It's suggested that she keeps the deviant in the toy factory for her own personal usage, and don't forget that in the toy factory, she seems to be in the business of making toys for the sect. Are these meant for the children? This is horrible. With the way Puppet Futterman harps on his daughter's promiscuity, he uses certain very misogynistic and untrue language, I'm sure you can guess which. It makes sense that Gooseberry in adulthood would feel, I guess I can say, sexually liberated by his death.
Oh, who invited you into my daughter's tunnel?
Oh, everybody's invited in, Dr. Daddy.
This seems also to be the case for Gooseberry's relationship with food. We saw that in the comics, Gooseberry cut a relatively thin figure back when she was imprisoned at Holmesburg. When we see her in-game, she looks to have doubled her weight. I think this point is extra salient, because when you look at what kinds of insults Puppet Futterman has in his arsenal, you'll see that they're mostly to do with Phyllis's weight. I said before, he calls his daughter a cow whenever he can, in 2 languages. He says she's too big to fit in certain spaces the reagents have escaped through. He talks about how slow she waddles. He says waddles like it's her default movement setting. There is so much of this, we have to believe it was the primary means by which Dr. Futterman criticized his daughter in life. He might have even starved her to keep her thin, in trying to quote-unquote help her maintain what he deemed an appropriate weight for a young girl, and punished her if she ate more than he thought was right. No wonder Gooseberry in adulthood developed an unhealthy relationship with food, where once she was free from her father's overbearing restrictions, she could eat as much as she wanted. This is where we find the origin point for her twisted notion of fun, and her disdain for rules and even moderation.
Trying to tell us what the rules are when all we want is a little fun.
I like the irony in this outcome. You have Dr. Futterman calling her daughter fat when she wasn't, saying she was promiscuous when she wasn't, and trying so hard to mold his daughter to fit these weird societal ideals. But Phyllis, taking all this abuse while she was blameless in reality, probably eventually came to feel that she couldn't do any worse by cutting loose and indulging. Her father made sure that she already felt like she was at rock bottom. It wasn't as though she had to fear being insulted by him, since it was happening anyways. I think it's also worth adding that Murkoff likely saw Gooseberry's disinhibition as conducive to their therapeutic goals and tried to help further it along. Remember that in the comics, Gooseberry at Holmesburg still had all her hair. Her scalp was not yet bald and exposed. Could it be that it was Murkoff who shaved away Gooseberry's hair so they could perform brain surgeries on her? Surgeries which would further reduce her impulse control and increase her aggression? Credit for this theory goes to Professor John Red Llama Outlast. If we're talking about Phyllis giving in to all her formerly suppressed desires, then her unchecked homicidal rage must also be counted among these. I mean, yeah, she probably killed her father, but she also very probably does not like to think about that fact. It seems that only on some subconscious level does it register to Phyllis just how much injustice she suffered at the hands of her father. It seems that she rebels against it, given how she rebels against every rule he set for her in life. And so I wonder if her use of Puppet Futterman in particular is meant to show the world, or at least the reagents and X-Pop and the observing scientists, who her father really was. I wonder if she wants everyone to know what a horrible man he was, simply by putting on full honest display the exact kind of person he was behind closed doors. There are many purposes for the puppet, aren't there? We know that Phyllis needs him because she clings to her father as this kind of psychological crutch, but I also imagine that she derives a great deal of relief from the fact that he has been reduced to a helpless puppet, who can harm her with words, but not physically or in other ways. And before I go on, I should say that there are 2 voice lines which do strongly suggest that Dr. Futterman did harm his daughter in certain other ways.
Dr. Futterman? Daddy? What are you doing? Stop! Stop! It's best to just let him finish.
If you want to talk about how trauma from SA can manifest as hypersexuality later in life, that's valid. I personally just don't feel qualified at all to speak more on the subject, which is why I had that different interpretation earlier on Gooseberry's sexuality. I'm also not really going to talk about how she's aroused by the deviant, who is meant to represent her father, and then she sees him being tortured and that's still a turn on. It's like a vengeance fulfillment type of thing, or I don't know. I do not know how to talk about this. Phyllis nowadays being in literal control of her father, being his puppet master, probably puts to rest a lot of her childhood anxieties, while also allowing her to benefit from the comfort of having him near. And she can make him say whatever she wants. Which is strange, right? Because all along, I've been acting under the assumption that the dialogue she's giving him is more or less fully accurate to the words of the real-life Dr. Futterman. We should think more carefully about this. I mean, it muddies things up in a really exhausting way, but it is worth considering.
I'm sorry I'm so hard on you.
Oh, Daddy. I mean, Dr. Futterman.
It's because our work is so important.
I know, Dr. Daddy.
I only want your teeth clean so I can see your smile.
This is a very rare voice line in terms of content. Nowhere else does Phyllis use Puppet Futterman to fulfill a fantasy like this, the fantasy of fatherly approval. There's a couple voice lines where Puppet Futterman shows he's protective of Phyllis, and I assume this is also Phyllis working to convince herself her father does care about his daughter deep down but just won't show it, that sort of thing.
Don't you push my daughter!
But the far majority of lines, as I've been saying, are just verbal abuse after verbal abuse, which we assume is accurate to Dr. Futterman's real behavior. But then there's other lines that play into the fact that Puppet Futterman is aware he's a puppet.
Did you hear that, Phyllis? Even I heard that, and I don't even have ears. Does it look like I have legs?
I mean, what is this? Is this meant to further reinforce the idea that Puppet Futterman is a harmless thing attached to and controlled by Phyllis's own hand? Because this gets dangerously close to the reality that Phyllis's father is actually dead, which, as we know, should set her off into one of her lizard-brained rage lapses, so I don't know if I like this interpretation. And this also begs the question of how much control Gooseberry has over whether or not she becomes the personality of Puppet Futterman. I feel like people assume that with dissociative identity disorder, the individual does not get to choose what personality they're taking on at any given moment. Do we feel that this is true for Mother Gooseberry? I'm very conflicted on this because I don't think she's meant to be a super accurate depiction of a person suffering from DID, and even if she is, we're in really uncharted territory anyways, because none of her presented behaviors can be attributed solely to the DID. They are all contaminated by the unknown drugs Murkoff is giving her, the fact that she's ruling this fake simulated environment, the degree of lucidity she has regarding the fakeness of this environment, and so on and so forth. I don't know, I'm inclined to say Phyllis is in control of Puppet Futterman, that she is fully lucid and putting in effort to bring her father to life. Because if she can choose to make him comfort her, which would be way out of character for the real life doctor, then surely she is also choosing to make him insult and abuse her as he actually did in life? Whatever the case, when Phyllis speaks for Puppet Futterman, it never means just one thing and one thing alone. These inconsistencies of behavior and of belief crop up elsewhere. Gooseberry will sometimes see us reagents as innocent children to be saved, delinquent children to be punished, and at other times, she sees us as adults who are trying to threaten her children. I mean, her perception of us is dependent on what we're doing in the trial, so you could argue it's not totally an inconsistency on Gooseberry's part, but when the switch-ups are happening within the same trial, towards the same reagents, it really feels like it is. Even this motion comic, that I'll bet a lot of people forgot about, shows us another glimpse into Gooseberry's impossible-to-track logic. Here she talks about the necessity of rules, when we so clearly see the disregard she has for all conventional rules, as I talked about earlier. Again, you could argue that this isn't Gooseberry being inconsistent, it's just a matter of her defining her own set of rules. But I think this all boils down to her father teaching her that if you can transform into a different person at will and go from angel to monster in a blink, then why can't anything else also be whatever you choose when you deem it convenient? I think the most tragic thing about Mother Gooseberry as a character is the irony that, while she's the one physically controlling the Futterman puppet, it's really she herself who will forever remain psychologically changed to and controlled by her deceased father. She not only ended up perpetuating his abuses, but amplified them on an enormous scale. She's so far gone that she doesn't even appear to know what she's doing is wrong. She expresses zero guilt for all the horrible things she's doing. The only guilt she ever feels is over the deaths of her mannequin children, and that's another tragedy in its own way. Of all the prime assets, I would probably call Gooseberry the most difficult to blame, which is a very relative assessment, you know? I'm not excusing her actions nowadays when she's drilling holes in people and giving children flour and possibly toys of the sect. That's where you cross the line. But what I am saying is that I can understand how and why these behaviors came about. At least Dr. Futterman can rest peacefully knowing his daughter learned a thing or two from him. Special thanks to Professor John Red Llama Outlast, Ursula, and jakefiber for helping me with this video in terms of theory crafting and interpreting Gooseberry's character. Because this was really hard, man. I don't know why Gooseberry is so hard to analyze. Just be simpler, man. Also, if you've gotten this far, I also want to go back and add on to my previous video where I talked about the psychology of Coyle. My good friend jakefiber, who I just mentioned, had some very great points to make about Coyle's obsession with electricity, which I neglected to talk about completely, so I will share them here. This interpretation is also peak.
let me tell you, I got everything I could ever ask for. I got the looks that men desiderate and women appreciate. Ooh, I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Your video f***ing sucks! Just kidding, I love you. Keep playing Kill the Snitch. Just calling it your favorite. Maybe one day I'll get a third try.